Hello, and thank you for joining the CannAtlantic Conference, the country's first Mid-Atlantic cannabis conference brought to you by the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists. If you're watching this session's all about fundraising beyond investors. How can you raise money in various ways? How can you ensure you have good accounting and financial practices to keep your dream and business alive? Participating in this conversation is Aja Atwood, CEO of Trella Technologies, and Jessica Velazquez, the treasurer of the Minority Cannabis Business Association. Thank you both for joining us for this conversation. I'm really excited to talk about this. Money is important to keep your businesses alive. So really appreciate you both joining for this important conversation.
Thank you, Tahi.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So we're going to get right into this. But first, before we get into the nitty gritty of accounting and fundraising, can you just give viewers a little bit more background information of both of your organizations, your businesses, and who you are? Jessica, I'll start with you first.
Yes, thank you so much again for having me here. As you mentioned, I am the treasurer for the Minority Cannabis Business Association and have been in this seat for about 2 years now. The organization is a national trade association that focuses on lifting minorities in the industry and providing them with education and opportunities to succeed. But in addition, I serve as founder and managing partner of Indiva Advisors. We are a CPA firm that specifically caters to the cannabis and hemp industries. I've been doing this for a few years now. How I got into it, I felt definitely when I saw legalization on the forefront in 2014, that this was what I wanted to do and what I wanted to be when I grew up. The fact that, I saw legalization in my lifetime was definitely a calling for me to join the industry and bring my tools and skills that I built in my profession so that I can service the industry and make a difference there. So that's what brought me to cannabis.
Rookie mistake. Aja, your turn. Can you introduce yourself and tell us more about you and your business?
Sure. Well, thank you, Tahi, for having me on the CannAtlantic Conference. I'm really glad to be a part of it. I am located in Massachusetts, but grew up in Philadelphia. And that's kind of how we connected. So thank you for including me on this. I'm currently the CEO of Trella Technologies. I'm one of 2 co-founders, but I'm also an engineer by degree and a cannabis patient, medical patient. And I came into the industry back in 2014 when I started to first learn about the medicinal value of cannabis. Similar to a lot of people, I understood the recreational value, but I didn't really understand the health benefits until I needed to use it for myself. So in doing some research about that, I learned how to grow and developed a problem in my own grow lab, my own grow room that I needed to solve. And that problem was trying to control very tall sativa strains, and even outside of sativa strains, trying to control very tall plants to grow in my basement, in my grow room. I had limited height. A lot of other people have limited height and have limitations on space as well. So while I was traveling a lot for my day job, I needed a solution that would help me to train my plants so they wouldn't get out of control. So myself and one other co-founder got together and developed a system that automatically trains tall plants to grow sideways, horizontally, so you can control that height, get a nice even plant canopy, increase harvest. But when you control the height, you can stack them and you can make the most out of your space. So it was a problem that we were solving for ourselves that we found other people had the same issue. So we decided to try to solve it for others. So if you want to learn more about that, you can check it out at trella.io. But the other thing that's important to me about this cannabis space and being an engineer is before I got into cannabis, I was a risk engineer, really with natural catastrophes. So focusing on things that impact businesses, properties, from earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, wildfires, which we're experiencing a lot right now. So for me, the big mission, the big push is trying to figure out how can we do indoor farming, indoor growing in a sustainable method, because we need to protect our food supply. We need to protect our medicine. So indoor farming is where my focus is on trying to make sure that it's sustainable and ready for the new world that we've created.
And certainly, as the climate continues to change, that is going to become even more pressing and more important more than ever. Risk assessment, that is a good segue into our second question, because we know, I'm sure, as people who are interested in getting into the cannabis industry, whether you want to get a license, whether you want to create an ancillary business, there's some things that you need to consider first. And we're going to talk about kind of the big thing that is impacting a lot of businesses is the 280E tax code within the IRS tax code. What is 280E? We hear about that a lot on how that's impacting cannabis businesses within the industry, but can either of you describe a little bit more of what 280E is and why is that important for people to know? I'll open that up to either of you.
Happy to take the lead on this one. We deal with this issue every day in our work and our client base. IRS Code Section 280E, simply stated, says that an operator that is trafficking in the Controlled Substances Act, which is where cannabis falls as Schedule I under the CSA, cannot deduct any operating expenses related to that business. And the only expense that they are able to deduct is the cost of their goods sold. In other words, the inventory that they either purchase if they are a retailer or produce if they're a cultivator or in the production space. So this code section specifically applies to all of our plant touching operators, our licensees, folks that are either, again, selling or producing a cannabis product. This code section was enacted in the early 1980s when the war on drugs campaign was really hot and heavy during the Reagan administration. I do not believe that they would have ever envisioned that, a few decades later, almost 40 years later, that we would have legal cannabis. And this archaic code section would hinder us in what is our growth stage, right? And so because of this law, we have what should be effective tax rates around the norm of 21%. That's the corporate tax rate currently. We're seeing effective tax rates as high as 70% for some of our clients because of 280E. So really impactful. There's a lot of current, potential legislation that would do away with that, such as the MORE Act, that would deschedule cannabis and again provide for this lift of 280E implications to our plant touching operators. But very impactful.
And I'll just add to that. I mean, that was one of the things that even as we're not a plant touching company, we're considered an ancillary cannabis company, which means that we don't really touch the cannabis product. We sell equipment for those individuals that touch the product. But we did have to be careful about how we delineate who our customers are. And if they are all majority licensed cultivators, then we might wind up being treated the same way. So even if you're an ancillary business, it is something that you need to consider and be aware of.
That's actually surprising. I thought ancillary businesses were a little bit more protected, but I didn't even realize that if you have a large clientele of people who are actually touching the plant, that you might be lumped into that same scenario, which would be devastating, right?
Yeah, we haven't seen that in case law. We really haven't. The majority of all of the case law specific in this industry has been around licensed operators, right? Again, our plant touching licensees and the impact that 280E has on that. I would argue strongly that 280E does not impact ancillary companies, nor should it, because we do not traffic in the context of 280E. That just does not apply to us. We provide services, we provide products, we provide a multitude of other things, but we do not either sell or produce the plant. So again, I would say, no, if you're an ancillary company, hopefully this is not one of the things that you should be worried about.
That's
certainly
good.
yeah, great for us, great for Asia, right? A company like yourself and you branching out into providing a service to the industry. And again, a firm like ours that does the same.
Yeah, yeah. And the ancillary business, it definitely does provide the protection. As a risk engineer, I always have, I'm saying, what's the maybes that we haven't experienced?
We don't know what the government's
So,
going to do, right?
Yeah. So I'm a little bit more cautious, but yeah, I'm those protections for ancillary businesses are huge, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the panel.
Yes, and so let's get into the money talk. Is it wrong for me to say that outside of having to hustle for investors, is it wrong to say that there are a myriad of other ways to raise money? Or is investment really for building a cannabis ancillary business, so to speak? Is investing and trying to get investors for direct financial support, is that the only way to go? I'll open that up to both of y'all.
Yeah, that one's a doozy. Please, Aja.
Yeah, so I mean, that the decision on how to get funding was actually huge in what pushed us towards ancillary. We were thinking about whether or not we wanted to get a license and do the tech business at the same time. But it's really, getting the license and going through that legal avenue is almost a full-time job in itself. So we decided to kind of stay in the ancillary space. And one of the other reasons we were worried about that was the huge amount of capital that you have to get into the cannabis space. But quite frankly, even in the tech industry, even in agritech, you need a lot of money to move as well. But doing some research, and I was also part of another startup before the startup I'm in, but doing some research, I was trying to figure out different ways that I could fund the business, and found that the majority of companies don't use VC or angel investors to start their companies. And this is all industries, not just cannabis, but all industries. The majority of them are with personal savings, your own credit cards, or your friends and your family. That's like 90% of the way that people start businesses. So if you're in the cannabis space, you may need to either find family and friends or use your own personal savings if you can. But again, because it's such a huge upfront expenditure, that might be pretty hard for people to do. So we went in the direction of crowdfunding. And that was something else that's another avenue that people could take. You could do what's called rewards-based crowdfunding, or you could do service donation-based crowdfunding, or you could do equity crowdfunding. And I won't get into that too much right now, but I did just want to mention that there are lots of other ways to raise capital besides trying to find that one investor or those 2 or 3 investors. And usually, in order to do so, you need to either have connections, be in that network, know those individuals already. You can't really, so if you don't, like I can't just come up to someone on the street and say, hey, invest in my company. You can't do that. But you can with regulation crowdfunding, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. So you really have to know people. You have to already have a network. You have to be around people who have a high net worth that can actually maybe even invest in you. And for the good majority of us, that's not where we land. And that's not where I landed or my co-founder landed. So we had to come out of pocket. We had to do the personal, bootstrap, use our savings. And then that got us to a certain point. And then after that, we went to crowdfunding. So I do think you're going to have to be creative. I've seen individuals in the cannabis space that are trying to find money, trying to raise money. They sell something else that's not cannabis related. They may sell their service, or they may create a real estate trust and try to, move money through that avenue. But you do have to be creative in order to raise money. And I think that's just not in cannabis, it's in general.
Yeah, I would agree with Aja. Like in general, it is about 90% of businesses that get funded through friends and family. So it's money that we know. It's money that's around us. It's people that are in our network that are going to support, this new venture that we're doing. Those are probably that's the first place you should be looking, is in that group. And even before that, some of the things that are important, even when you're having those conversations with friends and family, is the business plan. That's the first thing I want to talk about with my clients. And it's really where I started as well. It's developing a business plan. What did I see for Indiva Advisors? What was that going to look like as far as services and revenue and my expenditures? Did I have a good sense of what I needed to get that company off the ground and make it succeed? And putting that together in a solid business plan is what I was able to provide to an angel investor that actually gave me $50,000 in addition to my own money to start the company, because it was what I believe a well thought out plan, and it gave them comfort that their money is going to also succeed, that they're going to get their return on their investment. And so speaking to what investors are looking to is important. But going back to some of the comments that Aja mentioned, I think again crowdfunding is a great source of potential capital for the right company. So those participants are also looking for a what are they investing in? So I come back to that business plan. But most recently, too, I will say this, in the industry, I've seen a few additional sources of lending now open up. So there are lenders that are willing to provide capital. It's at some higher rates than our traditional financing sources. So it is, higher than 10%, lower than, let's say, 25%. But again, other options are now available where, 4 or 5 years ago, we just didn't even have that. And so there are a few additional avenues, and it really, I think, starts with a solid business plan. So you're attracting the right investors and capital to your business.
Thank you. Business plan, having a foundational business plan is definitely the first step before launching. But even with business plans, sometimes we know, and I'm sure both of y'all have seen, that sometimes things don't go the way that we plan, and the financial directions that we want to go sometimes just don't happen in the way that we want, or the money that we're raising doesn't come from the sources that we had initially envisioned. Let's talk a little bit about kind of mistakes and things that we've learned in this space, especially when it comes from an accounting and financial perspective. Jessica, for you specifically, let's start with you. I mean, with people that you've worked with, or people, other cannabis businesses that you've seen working in the space, what are some of the common mistakes that you see some cannabis businesses, whether they're ancillary or license holders, what mistakes are they making that you want people and viewers to be aware of?
Yeah. Not in an effort to not sound like a broken record, this is the last pitch on this business plan that I'm going to really kind of say how important it is, because you'd be surprised. I got clients that are taking in significant amounts of capital with a business plan that is just not updated, current, reflective of where they're at. And so the business plan is the starting point, but it's not stagnant. It is a fluid document that you are changing through the life cycle of your company. It's being modified, it's being updated. And so I see a lot of companies without this. And to me, that is like driving a bus without a map. You have no idea where you're going. You're just kind of going by the seat of your pants. And that's okay from an entrepreneurial perspective. I know we all kind of operate from our gut and what it feels like, what feels right, and what we think is happening. But to see it on paper and to see it actually measure up against what actual financials are is sometimes eye-opening for entrepreneurs and the clients that I speak to. So I think that's certainly the key. One of the other key mistakes that I see is not really focusing on accounting functions sort of from the get-go. What I see is, again, entrepreneurs are wearing a lot of hats, so many hats to get the business off the ground. And sometimes accounting is sort of the afterthought. It'll happen, at least once a year to get a tax return filed. but that's not really providing the business owner with active information. How do you know what levers you need to change and what you need to do if you're not reviewing those financials on at least a monthly basis and making sure that they're accurate? And so we find ourselves doing a lot of cleanup work for clients that we onboard, only to a year or two later, we're like, how were you managing your business when all of this wasn't really in place, throughout that span? So I do encourage, would-be entrepreneurs and would-be business owners to keep that sort of top of mind. It's the financials are really that roadmap that help you determine what decisions you need to make from a business perspective, when you have to pivot and when things are changing, what is the best route to take?
And Aja,
Yeah.
you live it every day. What have been some of the lessons learned on some?
There's a lesson learned every day.
What do viewers know? What should they be aware of?
Yeah, there's lessons learned every day, but I do agree with Jessica that financial piece is so key, and that it does. And one of the things that we did, because we wanted to go in the direction of regulation crowdfunding, and with regulation crowdfunding, you have to submit financial paperwork every year to your investors. We're almost a publicly traded company. Our financials are publicly available. Our profit and loss statements are publicly available. So we have to have our financials in check. So that was one of the things that we spent some money up front doing, was to hire a controller to make sure that every month I had statements and I could really track our expenses and our income and keep ourselves on the up and up. One of the mistakes that I made, however, and I don't know, this is maybe not what you might have been looking for in regards to mistakes, but one of the mistakes that I think I made in 2019, for the majority of 2019, was keeping my foot in two different directions when it came to how I wanted to raise capital. I had always kind of sensed that regulation crowdfunding was the way for Trella. But when you have advisors and people that have been doing this for a while saying, you can do VC, you can get an angel investor, you should put your pitch deck together, you should go out, you should pitch, you should find the right person. I spent time doing that. And when you're trying to present a new idea that's so kind of out there, especially like Trella's is, it's not something that's easy. Like, people can't just visualize it. So it took a while, and people just maybe didn't get it, and that meant that I was going to have to be in front of a lot of people to find that person that would get it. And the way to do that is really with regulation crowdfunding. Now, looking back, I think to myself, had I put more of my energy into regulation crowdfunding in 2019, would we have been a little bit farther along? Perhaps. But there was some learning lessons experienced by going to VC, by looking for angel investors and VCs, because you get feedback. So, from time to time, I'd get some valuable feedback that would make me think, we can tweak the business a little bit, because that's something I really should consider. But I think for me, the biggest mistake that I've made in 2019 was probably not listening to my own gut on how I wanted to run the company and how I wanted to raise capital.
Maybe to add to that from an operational perspective, one of my big mistakes for 2019 was trying to grow too fast. Mm-hmm. And so we were doing great. 2018 was a great year. So going into 19, with all of the new markets coming online, it was that desire to again, sort of hit the gas pedal. And in that process, I ended up working with partners that didn't align with our mission, that did not align with the vision for the firm. And so for as often as I've told clients, not all capital is the same, I didn't sort of see it for myself. And so that was a learning lesson coming out of 2019. And to your point, Aja, which is so key, it's having that firm sort of belief in your mission and vision and what route you're going to take to accomplish it. Because it's not always obvious. And again, things are very fluid, right? Hindsight is 2020.
Right.
But the key here is, I think, you fall 6 times, but you get up 7. And you learn from it, and you implement sort of changes and that you learn from, and you keep it moving.
That is sage advice. A lot of people, as we all know, we all fall down. So just gotta get back up and learn and keep moving forward with your vision. We have about 5 minutes left, and I wanted to point out I wanted to end this with talking about the fact that the CannAtlantic Conference not only convenes people in this space, but it also doubles as an opportunity for journalists and media and content creators to better understand the stories that are missing when they're trying to cover the cannabis industry, whether it's the movement to legalize, whether it's the creation of the industry itself, and those who are trying to participate and become businesses or win licenses. When it comes to just media and the information that you look at that's important, what is the media missing around coverage when it comes to accounting or the financial aspect of the cannabis industry? What could journalists be doing better to keep people informed, especially those who want to become entrepreneurs and kind of strike out and become part of this industry? What should they know, and how can the media do a better job at communicating some of the issues, but also some of the successes that we're seeing in this industry? I'll open that up to the room.
Aja?
Yeah, Jessica, you can go.
Yeah, I think from a media perspective, again, I mentioned the MORE Act earlier in the session. That's an important piece of legislation. That's super important. That would have an immediate impact on so many operators and would-be operators in this industry, licensees, plant touching and non-plant touching, right? Ancillary companies like ours. So from a media perspective, I'd love to see more discussion around that and who we should be reaching out to on a state-by-state basis, literally, so that we're like making calls and people activate to push that type of legislation, which would be progressive for the industry, for business, and for social justice within the industry. So I think that should be every day. We should be talking about that as we lead up to election day. And then as a side note, the media certainly does a lot of coverage around licensees, right? So like our big operators and MSOs and what's going on the licensee side. I'd love to see a lot more highlights and spotlights on ancillary companies and people that are, in the ecosystem and also doing great things like companies like Trella and so forth, right? This is what we're here to do. We're here to support the industry and move it forward.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's a difficult question, honestly, Tahi, because I don't know that I've seen everything, but what I don't see, what doesn't come through my feed, because you know how the algorithms are. But what I don't see on my feed is similar to what Jessica said, was highlighting people who are on the outskirts that are doing more of the infrastructure, the behind the scenes stuff. I do see mentions of people that win licenses, but what about all the other things that are kind of attached to that? And I also feel like there's a lot of hype around how much money people have made, and think more stories about expungement. How are we using that money to get people out of jail? How are we using that money to include more opportunities for people who have been negatively impacted by the war on drugs? I see a talk that we need to do expungement, but I don't see a lot of examples of success of those people that have actually made it out of expungement, that have been able to participate, and that we could highlight and say, this is what we're talking about. These are the people that were locked out of the system that are now participating and doing great things, because there's lots of them out there. But sometimes I think because they may have, a history that people might think they don't want to highlight it. I think people need to see all types of walks of lives and how they've gotten themselves into this cannabis space. So that's what I'd like to see.
Snapping my fingers on all the points for sure. Last but not least, I'm going to put some information down on this little ticker to let people know how they can learn more about your organizations and your businesses. But just give viewers verbal contact information. How can people stay in touch and connect with you or your organization?
Yeah, I'll go first. Again, my name is Aja Atwood. You can find information about my company Trella Technologies at trella.io, which is scrolling across the screen. I also talked a lot about regulation crowdfunding. It's also known as equity crowdfunding, and it's very different from Kickstarter, Indiegogo. It's a game changer. If any of you are familiar with a term called SUSUs, communities coming together financially to support someone else's mission or to support one another, regulation crowdfunding is the modern day way to do a SUSU. So I don't think a lot of people know about it. So please go to ajaatwood.com. If you go to ajaatwood.com, there's a banner at the top, talks about regulation crowdfunding. What is equity crowdfunding? Check it out. It's just a video. In 5 minutes, you'll have a better understanding. And please reach out if you have any questions.
Yeah, again, I'm Jessica Velazquez. I'm managing partner of Indiva Advisors. You can follow us and find us at indivaadvisors.com. On behalf of the Minority Cannabis Business Association, again, you can see the information scrolling at the bottom of your screen here, but it's minoritycannabis.org. I'd also love an opportunity here to let the audience know that we are supporting a business foundation bootcamp and award program. So MCBA has partnered with Cohen Resnick to give applicants an opportunity to go through their financial boot camp, right? So this involves tax planning, business planning, real strategies so that you can come out of that program ready for capital fundraising. So I encourage everybody listening here to go to our website and apply today.
This has been a very informative conversation, one that I've been taking a lot of notes on, and I've been eager to talk about this too, because this is such an important thing. And Jessica, like you mentioned, sometimes accounting kind of falls to the wayside or goes in the back burner, but we know that it's really something important that people really need to think about at all steps. So both of y'all, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for supporting the CannAtlantic Conference, and thank you for participating in this conversation.
Tahi, thank you so much for the invitation. Happy to be here.